Across Africa, millions of farmers grow cassava to feed their families. Cassava tubers contain a lot of starch that gives energy, but they're poor in proteins that are needed for a healthy diet. Farmers like to grow cassava because it can tolerate drought and yield even on poor soils. In Côte d'Ivoire, rural women earn an income by processing fermented cassava pulp into acheke, a popular dish across the region. Today it's important to grow cassava because more and more people have begun to eat it. But establishing a cassava fields become more difficult because there's so much area used to produce rubber. In need of cash and food, farmers have also started to harvest their cassava when it's only 6 months old, when tubers are still building up starch. Farmers harvest very early because they need money to pay the school fees of their children and to cover expenses. This doesn't give a good yield. When harvested too early, the cassava tubers are not well developed. They are poor in starch and full of fibers and water. In this video, we'll learn how to improve cassava production and at the same time grow a protein-rich crop, such as cowpea, on the same field. To understand why certain practices are good, we need to know how cassava develops. A few days after planting cassava cuttings, fibrous roots develop. These roots absorb water and nutrients from the soil. When the first leaves emerge from the buds on the cuttings, they start to absorb sunlight and air. Plants use this light and air along with water and nutrients from the soil to further develop. By looking at the leaves of the cassava, we can tell whether it will have good tubers. The leaves capture the sun, and this gives strength to the cassava and makes it produce well. As cassava grows slowly in its early stage, make sure to control weeds during the first few months. About 2 to 3 months after planting, some of the fine roots begin to swell. Cassava tubers reach their maximum amount of starch between 8 and 12 months after planting. So the more the plant can take up sunlight, air, water and nutrients, the more starch will develop in the tubers. But with limited money to buy mineral fertilizer and few animals to produce manure, how can we get the best results? To improve our cassava production and restore soil fertility, there are 5 things to do. Use improved varieties. Apply organic matter. Apply small doses of mineral fertilizer. Grow a legume in between our cassava. And plant the cassava in lines, leaving sufficient space between the lines. Let's look at these one by one. First, use improved varieties. Older varieties are prone to diseases such as the cassava mosaic virus. Consult your local extension agent or farmer association to get high-yielding, disease-resistant cassava varieties. Some varieties resist drought better. Others branch early, which suppress weeds better. Some varieties mature more quickly. Others need more time. Farmers and extension agents in southern Côte d'Ivoire have tested 2 new varieties against their local variety. They regularly observe how the plants grow on different soils and under different practices, and discuss the results in a group. The new varieties that we received have lots of leaves and grow well on all soils. At harvest, they measure the number and weight of the tubers and take notes. The women also test how the new varieties lend themselves for preparing the local echeke. But the farmers can only truly make up their minds after they get a chance to taste the final product. At the end, they decided to alternate 2 cassava varieties that are resistant to cassava mosaic virus. One that matures in 9 months, with one that matures in 12 months. This allows them to spread their harvest. Secondly, apply manure or compost when you plant. Chicken rearing sheds have plenty of manure that's rich in nitrogen. Nitrogen is essential for plant growth. Do not leave chicken manure uncovered in the open air, and do not put fresh manure on top of your soil, as most of its nitrogen will evaporate into the air. It's better to age or compost the chicken manure before applying it to the field. The plant materials or wood chips will hold the nitrogen and release it slowly to your crop. When you remove manure from a chicken shed, it's not good to apply it to your field. You'll need to age it. In the beginning, it'll feel hot. Every day when you put your hand on it, you'll feel the temperature has gone down. When aged, it will also have lost its smell. Apply it when the heat's completely gone. It will have all the energy and necessary elements to be used as a fertilizer. Rather than spreading the manure across your field, you can apply it in lines, there where you'll plant the cassava cuttings. By doing so, your crop will directly benefit from it. Others prefer to add manure a few weeks after planting. Add a handful of manure or compost in the trench and close it with soil. This will protect it from being washed away by heavy rains and will stimulate the roots to grow. When you put the chicken manure around the cassava cuttings, the soil will nourish itself to become strong and the tubers will develop well. Third, apply mineral fertilizer. You can do this at the time of planting or about 3 weeks after planting, when roots have developed and can absorb nutrients. Farmers in Côte d'Ivoire apply 5 grams of NPK, which is enough to fill a bottle cap. They put this fertilizer with a handful of chicken manure around each plant. Cover the fertilizer with soil, as you do not want your money to be washed away by the rain. Fourth, grow a legume crop such as cowpea, groundnut, beans or soybeans in between your cassava plants. Sow vigorous legumes between 4 and 6 weeks after having planted the cassava to avoid them growing over the young cassava plants. Legumes absorb nitrogen from the air. This is stored as proteins in the edible beans and groundnuts. Also, the leaves of legumes are rich in nitrogen. By moving them under the cassava plants after harvest, this will feed your cassava. Another benefit of growing legumes in between your cassava is that legumes grow fast, quickly covering the soil surface, and by doing so, suppress weeds. You can't remove all the weeds by yourself. You need manual labor, and you need to pay them. So if you don't have the money, how will you manage? Fields with legumes have fewer weeds. If, for instance, you have half a hectare, with the old system the cost for manual weeding could be as much as 100,000 francs. But if you've planted legumes, you could pay just a quarter of this.
Elle peut descendre à 25 000.
Fifth, modifying the planting pattern. Convinced by what they have seen, farmers like Marcel have started to plant cassava at 1 meter by 1 meter distance and grow 2 rows of legumes in between the cassava.
Avant, nous plantons en désordre. Et nous nous sommes dit que planter en désordre et puis serrer.
Before, we thought that by planting the cuttings haphazardly and closely together, we'd have a lot of plants and get a good harvest. Well, it's just the opposite. You hardly get any yield. On the other hand, if you plant in lines and you leave sufficient space for the plants to develop, when you see the tubers, you'll be happy. With this new method, you can harvest the cowpea 3 months after planting.
Les légumineuses 3 mois après le planting.
Some farmers in Dabo have gone even further to modify their planting pattern. They make optimal use of space and light and reap even greater benefits. By changing the distance between cassava plants to half a meter within rows and to 2 meters between rows, more space and light is available between the cassava rows.
On peut faire 4 lignes de légumineuses sur les 2 mètres.
We plant 4 rows of cowpea on the 2 meters. 3 months later, we can again plant some legumes, but at that stage, the tubers have grown, and we plant only 2 more rows of cowpea. So, in a year, we can have an income twice to cover expenses while waiting for the large cassava harvest. So while farmers in Dabo improve their cassava yield, they also harvest cowpeas from the same field. They spend less on weeding and earn money twice before the cassava is harvested. Let's recap what we need to do to boost cassava production. To do this, we need to use improved crop varieties, apply organic matter, apply small doses of mineral fertilizer, grow a legume in between our cassava, and plant the cassava in lines, leaving sufficient space between the lines.
Cette méthode est plus avantageuse et plus rentable parce que
This method is more beneficial because the legumes enrich the soil that's already poor, and they allow the farmers to have an income before the school starts and to pay for various expenses.
avant la rentrée scolaire pour s'occuper de ses petits besoins.